I hand it over to you.
Well, thank you, David. And thank you to Marius and Metric Insights for joining us today on the datamanagementu.com webinar. We are thrilled to have you. And as David said, I'm Anne-Marie Smith. I am the executive editor of datamanagementu.com. If you are on this webinar and you are not a subscriber to the datamanagementu.com newsletter, please go to datamanagementu.com and subscribe. Some housekeeping points before we turn this over to David and Marius. Question and answers, we're going to take them as they come if we can, and at the end. So please put your Q&A in the Q&A box. Don't put it in chat because it's a different format and you won't get noticed as a question.
We're going to ignore you. Put it in Q&A. Keep
in
going,
chat,
Anne-Marie.
we won't ignore you, but we won't pay the focus attention.
Anne-Marie will ignore you. Next.
Okay, yeah. If you're interested in data governance, in data management, which some people conflate with data governance, so it's good to know the difference. If you're interested in metadata management or data literacy, datamanagementeducation.com is your source for online and on-demand courses at the university grade. They're rigorous, they're intensive, but they're also fun because they're taught by David Marco. And as you can tell, he's a world-acclaimed comedian. You can follow Data Management U and Metric Insights on social media. Please follow both of us. We're streaming this live to YouTube. Every time I say that, it strikes fear and terror in my heart because I realize I am now live on YouTube. But we're also doing that so that it's recorded. If you want to go back and watch this later, just subscribe to the EWSolutions channel and pick your favorite session. The presentation is available on the Data Management Webinars website where you registered. If you stay for the entire hour, you will receive a certificate awarding you 1 professional development unit. We'll send them within about a week to 10 days, and you must attend the entire webinar. Let's talk about today's session. The title is something I'm really interested in learning more about. BI governance for successful analytics. What are we going to learn? We're going to look about how to establish an effective BI governance program. We're going to discover some ways to promote data literacy in your organization to support BI governance and successful analytics. And what effective measurement and continuous improvement activities can you do? This will be an interactive discussion. As I said, we'll have questions and answers funneled in as appropriately and at the end, and then come back for the conclusion. I'd like to address and introduce our 2 speakers for today. Marius Moscovici. Did I pronounce that right?
It's Moscovici, but it's close enough.
Moscovici? I'm sorry.
With
the last name of Smith, I can
go with it.
Yeah. I'm sorry. It helps.
No worries.
Marius
pronounce that like a non-Italian Moscovici. I mean,
Right.
that with
that's
feeling
true.
and heart.
I really should have done it that way. Marius is the CEO and founder of Metric Insights, which is an excellent BI organization. He brings to this role experience in business intelligence solution implementations, dashboard and reporting systems, and BI and analytics solutions. We also have Dr. David P. Marco, whose name I can pronounce, who is known as a foremost authority on data governance, on metadata management, since he wrote the 2 top best-selling books, and generally analytics, data warehousing, business intelligence. If you have a question on any of those topics, ask David. Without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to David, who will lead us, and then to Marius. Thanks, David.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Well, I am excited for this webinar because we really want to make this interactive. So as Anne-Marie said, don't hesitate. Hit us with your questions, because what we want to do is really give you as much information as we can. And really, I'm going to kind of feed into Marius here. And we're going to talk about BI governance for analytics and how this is just essential for decision-making. This is just a background slide on EWSolutions. We've been doing this work since the late 90s, over 150 successful client partners. This is just my background slide. If you have questions, feel free to email me right here. That's why I included it. So let's talk a little bit about data analytics, because this is such a key topic. A lot of times companies will come up and say, we need to improve our data management function. And what they don't realize is data management is comprised of 13 different knowledge areas. And we really at EWSolutions view things like data governance and metadata management as foundational. Data governance gives our people processes. Metadata management gives the who, what, when, where, how, and why of our data. And these are foundational. Without these components and without proper governance of our analytics, we can't be successful. So let me talk a little bit more about analytics, and then I'll hand it over to Marius to continue the discussion. So we hear a lot about data science nowadays. What is it? It is an interdisciplinary field that really takes applied statistics, which many of us have used for a long time, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and other scientific methods, processes, algorithms, and you do this. You merge these best practices of math and statistics with deep business knowledge and combine it with great computer science and IT. So software and technology and capabilities. And when you do this properly, you get some good data science out of it. So when we talk about big data, what do we mean? Really, big data is just an accumulation of data that's too large to be processed by a traditional database management system. That's how I look at big data. A lot of times people make this definition overly complicated. We're working with a client partner now, they don't have that much data within their corporation. I could fit the entire company on one of my, here, let me grab it real quick. These little backup drives. I could fit all their data on this drive. They don't need to bring in Hadoop in an environment like that. Traditional databases will work fine. But then you have large Fortune 500 companies, they're in the petabytes of data. Now we need some different tech. Because when we look at big data, we're looking at the 5 V's: volume, variety, veracity, value, and velocity. Volume just refers to how much data do we got? Variety, what kinds of different data do we have? Structured, semi-structured, unstructured. I remember when we worked at the FBI, they were a major client partner of ours for years. They have a lot of unstructured data. Veracity, basically meaning, is the data trustworthy? And I can't wait. Marius is really going to hit this topic hard because he's going to talk about some of the things we need in order to have trustworthy data. This all ties into value, right? None of these efforts are worth it if we're not providing value. And then velocity, the speed at which data is emanating and changing between our data sets. Because when we talk about advanced analytics, we really mean 6 major types. They are diagnostic, descriptive, predictive, cognitive, automated, and prescriptive. What are these? Pretty simple. Prescriptive presents what actions should be taken in our current business situation. Diagnostic looks at the past to determine what happened and why. Descriptive describes what is currently happening in the business. Predictive, we used to call this forecasting for people who go back long enough, is likely scenarios of what may happen. Cognitive, this is where we have analytics that look to mimic the human brain by drawing inferences from our data. So we have a self-learning feedback loop, neural networks, decision trees, all the above. And automated analytics, where now we're removing the human component of decision-making and automating it. So This is the landscape. A lot of companies have made heavy investments into this. So I am going to hand this over to Marius, and he is going to take it from here because he has much to say and how you govern this huge landscape. So Marius, take it away.
Thank you, David. Let's see. Let me share my screen here. I trust everyone can see it. And so, yeah, so thanks. That's a great intro and a good sort of tee up into the topic. And so, what I want to sort of start with is when we talk about governance in general, I'm going to define what BI governance is for a moment, because I think that's an important place to start, right? A lot of times when people think about governance, they're just thinking about the data. How do we make sure the data is good, and how do we make sure that it's the PII data is protected, and all the things that are so important in an organization, and data governance is critical. But one of the key things to understand is that while it is necessary, it is not sufficient to establish good BI governance, because most of the data that you have in your organization, in fact, almost all of it, is being consumed by your users through BI tools, whether these be reports or even Excel spreadsheets, or things that people are just pulling the data in and doing that. There's some layer of visualization or presentation layer that is being used to deliver that information to the business user. And so when we think about governance, we need to think about both pieces of the puzzle. We need to make sure that we have governance strategies that address the data governance challenges, but also make sure that the analytics governance is addressed as well, that you're governing the process by which analytics are created, published, consumed, and trusted by the organization. So this is a very key point when we talk about we're going to talk about BI governance, not just data governance in this presentation.
Marius, it's so interesting the point you just made. So we're working with a client partner today who doesn't have analytics, if you could believe it, and they're a significant organization. And one of the things that we made as a key point of our strategy is, if we don't have good governance, these analytics aren't going to be worth their weight in dirt. I mean, it isn't going to happen, because the numbers are going to be inaccurate. They're going to be misleading. And I see way too many organizations with this problem. So I think your topic is sensational for this webinar.
I think, David, you put your finger right on it. It's so often the case that people build all that. We'll talk about that in a moment, but build out these whole analytics infrastructures, and then only after making investments of millions and millions of dollars do they realize that, well, now we've got a bit of a mess, and we go and apply governance. And so having a proactive approach and thinking about governance from day one, that's the right approach, because that's the way you're going to get to have the maximum velocity and success with your initiative. So one other thing to think about is, what does effective BI governance mean? Great that we need governance, but what does it mean? And this is a one way in which we think of it, in that we think that there's sort of a number of different characteristics that you would see in an organization that would tell you that your governance is actually effective. So let me kind of break that down, and I think it's warrants some discussion. So we have the coexistence between security and discoverability. So what do I mean by that? Well, obviously governance oftentimes is about securing data such that, the PI data is not accessed improperly, sensitive data is protected. That's of paramount importance. But at the same time, you need to have a governance strategy that makes sure that those assets within the enterprise that you want people to consume, that they can be discoverable. And that even in a situation where maybe I, as a user, do not have access to a piece of content, maybe that particular content, I should at least be aware that it's there, right? So that instead of going in there and searching and not finding it because I don't have access to it, and then going off and rebuilding that very same thing, and now there's duplicative content out there, or worse, there's something that looks a little bit like the original content, but just a little bit different, right? Instead of wasting all that effort, I should be able to discover, hey, there's a report on this particular area, and maybe go make a request. And then, the owner of that content can determine, yes, I'm actually authorized. Maybe I was not on the original access list for it. So balancing that out with governance, if that balance exists, then you have effective governance. Another hallmark is whether your environment looks more like a garden versus a jungle, right? So if you look in most large enterprises and you look at their BI ecosystem, they just look like these complete jungles where you have, duplicative reports, you've got content that is obsolete. You, as a user is trying to find, somebody who's new in an organization is trying to find new content, something they're looking for, they've got to stumble through all these things that are really not relevant at all on their way to like finding that one thing that's useful. So you don't want
Marius,
that. You want, yeah.
Can I give you a statistic on what you just brought up from? So let me frame this. Fortune 300 company. You mentioned duplicate data, dormant processes. You referenced all that. For this company, we measured this. We found out over 62% of their ETL jobs were dormant. Yet they were running them all the time. So just to give a real to what you're bringing up, these are not just words, these are facts. And this is what we're seeing. So I loved your term of garden as opposed to a jungle. Most sites look like jungles. When you say millions, if you're a global 2000 entity or a large government agency, you're probably in the hundreds of millions, possibly, if you've done this long enough, into the billion-dollar range of your investment. And your environment doesn't look like a jungle. It doesn't look like a garden. It looks like a jungle and smells like a junkyard. I will let you continue.
No, that's a great point. I think it's so true. And I think that, if you have that, if you have a well manicured, one of those Japanese gardens where every leaf is my place, your analytics are placed properly, people already know what to consume, then you're generating a high trust in both the data and the reporting. Right? People know, okay, this is a sales report I trust. So I can count on this data. And that's an easily measurable thing in the organization. And then as a result of that, you're seeing a high utilization of your BI tool licenses. So in your example, half of the ETL jobs being dormant, or more than half in your example, it's not unusual for half the reports or more than half of the reports in these ecosystems to be completely unused, right? And we've seen some customers where in excess of 80% of their content, the reports that people have built, is just sitting out there, and it's actually not being used, it's obsolete, and yet no one has kind of gone through and cleaned it up, right? And well, so how you can't possibly have a garden in that situation. And as a result, nobody's using those BI tools, right? They're getting maybe 50% of their licensing being used, even though they're paying for those licenses every single year. So it's tremendous waste there. And then the final piece of the puzzle is that you should, in a well-governed environment, your BI teams, they're all working in a way that really maximizes business value, which, as you said, David, at the end of the day, it's all about generating value, right? But if you don't have proper governance, the BI teams are just fighting fires instead of really focusing on those things that are going to really generate value for the business.
Marius, every point on this slide is so important. One of the things I wanted to bring up, because it's a challenge I have to deal with, in my consulting career, is the first point you bring up about a happy coexistence between security and discoverability. I have seen this messed up on both sides of that tightrope. I have seen organizations that lock their data so tightly, so securely, that people who have a job function within that data set, they can't even get the data they need. They have to go through hoops and days, if not weeks, to get data that should be readily available, because they need that data to do their job. And I've seen it the other way, where it's a Wild West, where anybody with a flash drive and a basic understanding of how to do copy paste could walk out of a company with their entire customer database. I've seen it and both are a mistake. We need a happy medium. I love your term coexistence, because I've seen so many companies make the error on either side of this tightrope.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And you've got to govern that at every part of the endpoint. It's not enough to say, well, I've got good governance at the, so that the analysts can't get discern data. You need to also make sure that your business user that's looking at a particular piece of content, if it has really, they should be able to get to content and look at it. But perhaps if it's got very sensitive information, it's not so easy to download or print that content. So that's right. We'll talk about that some more later, but I think that, the proper governance is incredibly important. And I think when we think about governance, there are three really gears, if you like, that have to mesh and come together in a seamless way to make it work. And oftentimes people obsess about just one part of it. They say, oh, I'm going to build a governance organization. And, they focus on that, which is, that's very important. You've got to have obviously the people in place, right, that are going to help. And oftentimes governance is not just the data governance team. That there's going to be only so many resources available there. And if you're looking at BI governance as a whole, it has to be a distributed function. It has to be owned by the BI analysts, the report creators, that everybody's got to participate with that. So having the right roles and responsibilities, that's a key foundational piece, but it's not sufficient. You need to also have the right processes, and the process has to fit the organization and the people that are involved, right? So the culture of your team, and making sure that you've got the right governance techniques in place, that the individuals that you've tasked with this and have agreed to perform the governance functions will actually do those things. And then finally, you have to have technology supporting this process, because if there's a process, but if that process is onerous, if it requires a whole bunch of steps and time, people are just not going to comply to it, and they're not going to. And unless you have a way to measure whether the compliance is taking place, you won't even know if it's happening. And so really, all three pieces, they've got to fit together. You can't just focus on one. You've got to look at it cohesively, and only kind of through fitting this jigsaw puzzle together can you get effective governance in place. And this is why, really, I think it's so rare that I think there was a Gartner statistic that I read the other day, that something like they were estimating in 2022, only 20% of governance initiatives in an enterprise are going to be successful, right? And so that's a staggering number, right? That means 80% of the people fail. And the reason for that is that people just focus on only one aspect of this, and maybe just, let me get a governance tool. Well, that's fine, but how does that fit into your overall ecosystem, right? You have to really understand the entire piece and how puzzle and how.
I have to jump in at this, Marius. You bring up such a strong point, is that too often people think, I purchase a data governance tool and I now have data governance. We plug it in and we're done. And it is so faulty. I use this analogy. Let's suppose I want to build a fence at the palatial Marco estate. And if I want to build a fence, do I need tools? Yes, I do. I need a hammer, I need a saw, and I need duct tape. Got to have duct tape, right? I don't know how to build a darn thing, but duct tape. Yeah, not my skill set. But anyway, I know you need duct tape. So if I have a hammer, saw, and duct tape, do I have a fence? No, I don't. I'm missing a couple things. One, I need a design. At first, I need to know what kind of fence. Tall fence, short fence, wooden fence, metal fence. What type of fence am I building? So, and you need an architect to design all that. And even if I have an architect and a design, then what am I missing? Workers to do the job. We got to dig the hole. We got to hammer the nails. We have to apply the duct tape. So Marius, to your point, you can't just buy software, plug it in and say, whoop, we're done. It takes a lot more than that. And it should be, as you brought up earlier, delivering business value. So anyway, I could just keep talking. I'll let you continue, my friend.
No, I think those are great points. And I just sort of kind of drill down into each of those silos, right? If you think about the people side of things, there's various roles that we see kind of predominantly occurring and required to make this work. You do need business owners to participate in the governance process. So the ability to say, coming up with the definitions and the business rules around the content that's being governed. You need the analysts, obviously, they're critical to map those business rules to specific business logic, such that, this is how we measure sales. Well, we've agreed on that. Well, now how does that translate into the database and collecting that information and bringing it into a visualization? And then the centralized data steward or governance team is very important as well, so that these data stewards role can be centralized into a centralized governance team. It can also be distributed. This can be they're just the folks within the organization that are on the data pipelining team and the data engineering team, basically, but individuals that take ownership over validation and quality of the data and making sure that the data is brought in and landed in a way that is consistent and meets the requirements for the downstream processing. And there are other roles as well, but broadly, I think you want to be thinking about these roles as you're developing a governance program and making sure that you think of the kinds of people that are going to be participating in these and getting buy-in on that from those individuals. So just to give you guys an example of that, just to kind of have a sense of it, let's imagine for a moment that you're trying to govern a particular piece of content. Let's say it's a Tableau dashboard. and it's maybe a sales operations dashboard. Maybe it's being used by your sales team to measure performance relative to target. In that example, let's think about kind of what are these different roles are going to do? Well, there's going to be someone who's going to be doing the business rule definition. So typically the business analyst or business owner is going to say, well, what is the attainment calculation? What are the territory definitions? So maybe this is your sales ops team that on the business side that says, well, this is how we're going to define our territories. This is how we're going to define attainment for this quarter. They work with their VP of sales to do that. They've defined the logic for that. Then an analyst will come in and they'll say, all right, well, now I know these rules. Here's how I'm going to apply those to be able to the underlying data to make sure that they're properly observed and that this dashboard actually shows the attainment calculation based on the rules that have been defined. And then finally, there's somebody who's responsible for making sure that, yes, the data has come in from Salesforce in a way that these calculations can be performed and that we haven't dropped any data. We have the proper quality checks in place so that the sales reps looking at this information will be assured every day that they're looking at the right data, that it's complete, that there's no issues with quality. If there is an issue with quality, that's been communicated. So this is just one example to kind of get you a sense of how these different roles would work together to govern from a holistic BI perspective. Again, we're not just thinking about the data, we're thinking about the entire pipeline, right? How that governance can take place in an example.
Yeah, and that's an important point on the pipeline. It isn't just too often somebody will need a report. Marius, just like you've said, hey, we want to report on sales. And somebody will say, oh, just go to that system, pull, I think sales is in this column. And they don't even know. They don't know that we have sales thrown across multiple applications. And maybe even some are duplicates. So we need to remove those along with sales type. Maybe in one system, we have sales types of 1, 2, 3 and another ABC. We have to integrate that into a good enterprise view. So I loved your reference to the pipeline. It's not just this little one-off simple thing. It's really an enterprise view.
I think that's absolutely right. And so the other sort of just from a process perspective, so we talk about people, let's talk about process. I think one of the guiding principles, the things that we see all the time, kind of is one of the biggest mistakes that people make as they think about the process, is they try to create sort of a one-size-fits-all approach. And what I mean by that is, you go in and you say, well, we know that the organization is not going to want to do a ton of process because, if we do make it too complex, then people are not going to adhere to it. But we need something because, having nothing doesn't work. So kind of let's just sort of split it down the middle and come up with a general process and apply it to everything that's not too heavy, but not too light, right? And the problem is that, that just doesn't work because fundamentally, the content that you're governing has different requirements. And just like you couldn't get a suit that fits every single person, right? Well, you can't have a process that fits every single asset that you need to manage well. So you need to have a much more nuanced approach and be thinking about how do you devise the right level of process given the type of asset that's being governed, given the characteristics of those assets from aspect sensitivity, the impact associated with that asset, and the size of the audience that consume that asset, et cetera. And that's a key driving principle to thinking through the process definitions. You've got to be a lot more nuanced and thoughtful about the process.
Marius, can I give you a real life example we had of this?
Please.
And I've referenced this so many times I see a lot of the folks on our webinar have been here for a while, so you've heard me give this example. I remember working at Mayo Clinic and we thought, we had to define sodium. And I thought, well, it's on the periodic table of elements. This is easy, 5 minutes. Brush your hands, we're done. Left with, I think, 26 different variations of the word sodium because these top doctors would just change like a little molecule, but yet they'd still call it sodium. And so when you talk about nuanced, I just want to give a real life example of this, where when you start working with organizations and building these things out properly, the way you're describing, there are a lot of these nuances, and boy, can they shock you. So I just want to give a real world example of what you discussed because it's true.
Thank you, David. So let's look at the final piece of the puzzle, kind of at a high level, before we kind of dive a little deeper into some of the examples that I have for you to look at. So looking at the process, I mean, we looked at the process, we looked at people from a technology perspective. We see sort of three pillars that have to be in place, right? So again, BI governance here, right? So if you're going to govern all your BI assets, you've got to be able to first put them all in one place. There's no way to have governance if every single user is accessing their analytic in a different place, because they go one place for their Excel spreadsheets and one to find the ones that they trust. They go into their SharePoint environment, and then they go to Tableau for the Tableau dashboards and Power BIs and the Power BI system, and so on and so forth, right? If that's how governance works, it's impossible to put any kind of process or solution around that, right? That's going to be uniform, because every tool has its own limited capabilities, and there's no way to standardize that. So bringing all those assets in a single place, and then having that the governed location, the governed entry point for the content, is sort of a key first step from a technology perspective. Then the second step is to enable a workflow around the publishing of content. So great that you have a place that's a governed space, but now how does that content that you have, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet or a PDF or a Tableau or Power BI or MicroStrategy or whatever content report you have, how does that content get into the system, and how does it earn its stripes from a certification perspective, right? So there needs to be a workflow around that supports that all of your needs and the nuance that we described around the nuance. And then the final piece of it is measurement. So if you've got things that are out there, now how do you make sure that you've got compliance? So how do you know that you're successful, so that things are actually being put out there that are being certified, and then the people are consuming it, that you're seeing impact in that consumption layer, and so forth, right? So having a way to measure and then adjust both process, implementation of the technology, and how people are working with this, so that you can iterate, because governance is not a one and done thing. It's not okay, I'm done, I've defined it, I'm finished. It is a iterative process. And so you have to have, all these pieces in place, and you've got to continuously iterate to improve. So with that, let's jump into kind of a few examples of these things I'm talking about. So first of all, let's talk from a technology perspective. If you're looking at one place to publish content, what does that mean? Well, this is an example of how this works, within Metric Insights, right? So you have a catalog. All of your assets will be represented in that catalog. In this case, in our example, they're represented as tiles. And then you need to have a hierarchy that breaks that down. So a way to categorize that information, a way for people to designate favorites. And then the whole thing needs to have a way for people to search content. So that's very important, right? If you can't search, search should be as easy as your Google search to be able to find that. And you want to be able to distinguish between those things that are certified and the things that are maybe just there through the still in process sort of certification. So, like a little check mark, little icons there support that. So having kind of one place, easy consumption model, different ways to consume it, that's the key piece there from a content publishing perspective.
Well, and Marius, can you go back to that slide?
Yeah.
So when people see a slide like this, there's so much information. I again want to kind of bring it back to what I see as a consultant in the organizations I work with. If you're a global 2000 company or a federal agency, this is probably a simplified version of what you have in your reporting. And I really thought what Marius discussed in the previous slide, where he talked about certifying these different reports and having a process for that, it is so vital, because probably if you're that big of a company, you have a whole bunch of reports that claim to have the same information. So having a good certification process tells you, hey, these reports really are the trusted ones. Maybe something else is maybe more part of a self-service type of an analytic. I think something like this is so valuable. So if you're a global 2000 company, this is your world, and you need to be looking at some help organizing it. So I just want to jump in, because I see this all the time, except most organizations don't have a pretty little dashboard like this where it's organized. It's just all over the place.
Well, like you said, if it's disorganized, then it can't be governed, right? It's by definition, governance is order, and then that's the fundamental issue.
How do you guys scan all this? How do you get like insight into all these different, like Tableau, Power BI, and all these other? Most companies, I like to joke, have almost all of the front end tools. They have 7, 8, 9, 10 different tools that between you and I kind of do the same thing. How are you able to bring all that in? Because that's a lot of metadata to bring in.
Yeah, so that's actually what we spent, years working on as far as building connectors to each of these tools and using the native APIs that are available. And then it's a process by which you really expose the metadata, and then typically you synchronize. You don't necessarily pull everything from a Tableau or a Power BI into a portal like this. What you do is you pull the things that are kind of staged, and of course in the production area, they're ready to go. And then there's even a vetting process that I'll talk about in a few moments, where you go through a publishing workflow process where somebody says, yes, this is ready to go, and here's some documentation on it, so that there's a process by which things graduate into the portal, right? So you want to make it super easy, where it doesn't take a lot of time to do that process. So everything should be metadata synchronization, all that has to happen behind the scenes. But it's important to have that step where somebody vets and says, yeah, this is actually, out of these 3 reports, this one's duplicated and this is the good one. The subject matter area in that space knows that, and then they promote that to the portal, and then that becomes where people find it, because that's the place they come to search and find all their content. And it can be thousands upon thousands of pieces of content, but if everything is organized well and cataloged and searchable, it's completely manageable, because it's not cluttered. And then the ability the value add around bringing something into a portal in general is that then you can overlay context with the content, right? So context is very important. And so there's a few examples of that. So here you can see somebody consuming like a Tableau dashboard within the Metric Insights portal as an example, right? And what you'll notice is a few pieces of information that are overlaid here that give important contextual information. So like at the very top, you'll see that first of all, hey, it's telling me here that the Snowflake pipeline that this dashboard is feeding off is delayed today, and that there's anticipated resolution time. Well, it's only possible to do that if you have a governed space where you're monitoring the pipeline and you're integrating the progress of that pipeline into your presentation layer, so that you can, if something is behind a particular timeline, or there's a data quality step that's missed and we know there's something wrong with the data, up can pop an alert right there when somebody's consuming it to know that there's an issue there. And that's incredibly important from governance perspective, because in most organizations, the executives of people consuming the content are the ones picking up the phone or sending the emails with all caps, yelling at the data practitioners saying, hey, this data doesn't look right. What's going on? Why can't we get it? Why am I looking at old data? You don't want to do that. You want to have a system where you're proactive, and as soon as you go consume the data, you're being warned that something is not right with it. And that's the difference between a governed and ungoverned environment. Right?
And Marius, what a great example you gave, because I would say I would say 80% of implementations I see do not have even a simple warning message like this. And what happens is, especially on a dashboard, one of your executives sees the data and they look, wait a minute, we're not showing today's data, last week's data, whatever is the refresh rate. And then they get on the phone complaining, when really, hey, you could have a very simple message like this, just saying, hey, it was delayed today. And I mean, maybe an ETL process went down, whatever the reason is, but boy, it changes the perception of the value your analytics provides in just a radical way. So I didn't want people to gloss over that, because very few implementations address this kind of real world stuff. So I'll let you continue. It's a great
and I think with your point, David, if you think about it, it also extends kind of to beyond the data itself, right? Because if you look at that pop-up that you see in the middle there, as a business user, maybe the data is good, so maybe I don't have that banner at the top, so I'm looking, but maybe I have a question about the data. Right. And I'm like, what am I looking at here? And, you need to make it really easy for people to get the context of, who owns this data, who's accountable to it, who's the business owner, who's the technical owner, who's the data steward. If there's classification information, like, does this contain PII data? What organization's owning it? What's the data classification? And this is different for each organization, but every organization has key contextual information that the person who's consuming this analytic needs to understand when they're looking at it, and that guides them going forward, right? So hey, this was verified by Mark, and it was verified for supply chain integrity as an example. All of those kind of notes and things of that nature that provide context important to be able to communicate to the user right in the consumption experience here, because if that's buried in some data cataloging tool, or like in your Relation or Calibra or some custom tool you've built, if that's all exists there, then it's doing no good for the business user who's consuming it. It's got to be brought front and center right in the consumption experience. So also, if I'm looking at this and I'm saying, oh, well, geez, I see that this, for example, up there at the top, I see it's got enterprise churn. That's a key term that the analyst is tagged with this visualization. I should, as a business user, if I want to have data literacy, I need to be able to click and be able to see, what does that mean? Right? Get a definition of it, because maybe I don't know, is this gross churn or net churn? Does this include this kind of customer or not? That definition needs to be front and center. You need to be able to connect the visualization that you have with the key enterprise KPIs that visualization measures, and then the definitions behind those enterprise KPIs in a way that the user can consume and access that information directly in the portal. And they should be able to go immediately from understanding, well, this is great. I see this as enterprise churn. This is interesting. What else do we have that measures enterprise churn that somebody's designated as consistent with this enterprise KPI definition? I should be able to get to the 3 or 4 or 5 or 20 other things that are part of the ecosystem that are around that particular enterprise KPI. And only if I can do all that, is it really that garden? Is it well structured? Does it yield an experience where I can really go through a flow and find everything that I need and consume and understand when I consume? So another piece of information that's really critical, and this is maybe more important to the analyst, but sometimes even a sophisticated business user needs to be able to look at this, is to know the lineage. So I'm looking at this information, I'm looking at this dashboard. Where does the data come from? How is it being sent out? Maybe there's a distribution, an email that's going out to a bunch of users with a bunch of content. Well, what's the content that's there? So being able to trace that back all the way to the source system, so that I understand the lineage as either an analyst or as a business user in a consumable way, super important from a contextual data literacy perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, this is another key piece. I think you talked about this earlier, David, the process. There has to be a process by which content is onboarded and brought into the portal. So for a process to be published, certified, that process might be very lightweight, where it's only 1 or 2 steps. It might be something that requires multiple steps because lots of people need to participate in it. Either way, there's got to be a workflow tool that manages that. So that has to be part of the publishing tool. So here you can see an example. A content is automatically synchronized into a pending review status. So kind of going back to what you had said before, David, as soon as there's a new Tableau dashboard, it's published into an area that by the publisher of dashboards that indicates that it's ready for a particular team to review. It automatically comes into the portal. Then somebody can come in here and say, yes, I'm reviewing it. I'm going to put it into a developer review state. Developer says, yes, this is correct. I've got all the metadata, all the definitions are certified. Moves into maybe a business review cycle where a business analyst looks and says, here's the enterprise KPIs they should be associated with. I'm checking that all the right documentation is there. Now it's ready to be published and certified, signed off, and voila, it's now available to be searched and consumed by users. So having it can be a very quick process. This could take 5-10 minutes, right? It doesn't have to be hours of work on every single analytic, but having it go through a process that's appropriate for that piece of content makes sure that then when it is published, all the contextual information that we looked at a few minutes ago is already present for that analytic that's being consumed. Okay, and then we talked about usage and engagement, the measurement aspect of it, right? So here's an example of that, right? So I want to be able to, if I've published all this content, in an organization, maybe dozens of people have been involved in the process, content publishers and business analysts and so forth. I need to be able to, on a regular basis, go in and understand what content is being consumed, what's popular, what's increasing in popularity, where am I doing a great job because people are engaged with it, and where do we have issues? What is the unused content that's out there, and what's decreasing in popularity? Because that unused content or the decrease in popularity content, well, maybe I need to promote that. Maybe I need to let people know about it because they're not aware of it. Or maybe it's been promoted, it's not being used. Well, perhaps that needs to be removed. That's a pruning exercise, right? That's where the gardening comes in. I'm going to remove that content because it was relevant 6 months ago. It's been replaced by something else that's more relevant. So let's not generate clutter in the ecosystem. So an infrastructure that allows you to do that across, again, all of your content, whether that be a Tableau dashboard or a data science asset or a spreadsheet that's published to the portal. You need to be able to have that same exercise on a regular basis as a content publisher, and then do this gardening. And by doing so, with just a little bit of effort every month, you can make sure that environment continues to be a garden.
Marius,
yeah,
we have
please.
a bunch of questions.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, then
Are you ready for questions, or should we
yeah,
wait?
why don't we do that? Let me stop the slideshow, because I think the questions are most important. Let me stop sharing, and then let's just dive into the questions that are there, and David and I can jump on that, because I think that's more important than going through every single slide.
Okay, and we would love for you to come back and
Mhm.
do a deeper dive.
That'd be
We're getting
fantastic.
lots of requests for that.
That's
I just
great.
wanted to point that out before we start the questions. One question is, how about change management when publishing to the portal? What practices do you recommend quickly as the ones to focus on?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And it strikes on a key point, right? Because, okay, let's say you go through this governance process and you publish your content and everything's great initially. Well, we all know that over time, things change, right? The asset that was really valuable 6 months ago, like I said a moment ago, might not be valuable now, or maybe a year or two from now, the environment changes. So you need to have processes that ensure the continuous reevaluation and rejuvenation of the content. And that means either when something gets published, figuring out when does that need to be recertified, right? Is it 6 months? Is it 12 months? Is it 18 months? Everything has a timeline by which you want to reevaluating it. And then having some processes where it comes back up for evaluation. Now, in some cases, you might need to recertify, have it get decertified and get recertified. So an example of that might be, I've got a sales dashboard that shows territory alignment, and at the beginning of every fiscal year, we realign all the territories. So your portal technology needs to be able to enable the ability to say at the end of every year, I'm going to certify this, and it's going to go back into the recertification process. Other things might just require a general review where every month, once a month, I receive a list as a content publisher of the content that I have published a year ago to review and to determine whether it should continue to be certified and published or whether it should be pruned, right? And I'm going to go through those usage analysis to take a look at that. And then finally, there's changes in the underlying asset. So if I go in and I've got a Tableau dashboard and I make a change to that dashboard and I republish it, well, if it's important enough, that's probably something that should be bubbled up, detected and bubbled up, so that the managers of that content can be aware, hey, this thing was certified and it's changed since certification. Maybe we should automatically decertify it, or maybe we keep the certification, but we put in a review process to say, did that change affect the certification? Did I fundamentally change a business logic there such that it's no longer valid, or is it still really good and keep it certified? So all of those things need to be in the technology that you deploy to ensure that you've got the both to support a process where that continuous gardening that refurbishes and replenishes and keeps that content fresh and accurate and relevant takes place.
I am so glad I chose that one as the first question. That was such a detailed answer, and I learned so much. I really did. And I hope that the people who asked that question, because it was posed by more than one person, felt the same. Here's a question. This is about culture. Any tips on how we can shift our analytics community's perception of BI governance from a grunge task to a value-added task? How can we make BI governance, and here's the word they used, sexy?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think I'd love to hear also David's input on this, because I know you guys have a challenges. But what we see is it's a kind of a there are multiple aspects to solving that problem. First of all, measurement's important, right? So you need to be measuring, the what's certified, what doesn't get certified, and who's doing the certification and so forth. But I think it goes beyond that. You need to have kind of an incremental approach to this. So I've described a lot of things here, but in reality, you don't really do it all at once, right? Governance is a kind of an evolutionary process, if you like, and it's an incremental process. And so it's very important to figure out the right first steps, and to figure out the steps that are going to, number one, add value, add business value. And number two, make the people that you want to involve in the process, make them look good. Make them look, so the example that we looked at, for example, putting in governance such that you are detecting when something goes wrong and notifying users of that. That's an example of something that makes the analyst look better, because their content that's been published out there, when business users come and consume it, because they're aware of issues proactively, they don't get yelled at. They don't get the calls, right? They look like the hero. This person is so on top of it. They've added the data quality checks, and now their content, and when I consume that content, that's good. Their dashboard has this this documentation and this context that provides value. So picking content first, governing the content that has the highest value. So being really mindful about what are you going to choose to govern, and then figuring out with the constituencies you work with, how do you institute that first incremental step that's going to be not difficult to implement, so it doesn't feel, oh, so much work, but it just feels like, oh, this is not too hard. And at the same time, it adds visibility and value, and then promoting the heck out of that, right? So making sure that people get credit for the fact that they're doing it. The business is aware of, hey, these are the analysts that are doing really hard work to make sure that you're getting the context, that you're getting usage, measuring the engagement around that content and showing success there, and then taking incremental steps from there. So don't boil the ocean, get success for people, get them excited, and then get incremental success from there. And that formula tends to work, because then you're building, success permeates more success. I mean, David, what are your thoughts? What do you think about that question?
Oh, goodness. So I've done webinars on this topic. It's such a big issue. And Marius, I love everything you talked about. So I'm going to come at it it's not another way, but just another facet. Again, we could probably go 2 hours on this only question. I'm going after, how do we make it sexy? I'm going after that part of it. This is what's interesting to people. So here's what I would like to do. Go after the business objectives of your company. Your executive board has listed 1 to 5 corporate objectives, and I guarantee you the analytics that you're providing helps meet maybe all 5 of those. Who knows, depending on how many they listed. If you're a federal agency, you don't have corporate objectives, you have mission statements. Go after those missions. And so this is a task. Marius, this is my number 1 task today. When we finish this webinar, I have 1 more meeting. And by the end of today, I have to, for a client partner of ours, and this is going right to the executive board, CEO, president, CFO, the whole group, showing, here's the situation we have today. And once we have really good analytics and good data management, here's going to be where we're at tomorrow, the art of the possible, if you will. And to me, and what I'm drawing, 2 slides. What's our situation today? What is it going to be tomorrow when we do this right? And BI governance, since that's the topic of our webinar, that's not sexy to any of those folks, but that's an enabling technology. When we build a home, bricks aren't all that sexy, but they certainly make a nicer home, don't they? So I'm going after. Yeah, like that's exactly it. And it should just be a part of a project plan. So let's hit, hey, I'll give you an example. This is not the one I'm working on today, but a past client partner, huge insurance company, massive. They want to double their revenues in 6 years. If you look at the last 5 years, flat as a pancake. How the heck do you do that? I won't bore you with all the iterations. There's only one way to do it. You've got to be able to cross-sell. Can you cross-sell without a 360-degree view of customer? Heck no, because you're going to step over your feet. You have 13 independent lines of business. So that's the sexy part. You govern your BI properly. You have the right information. Now you can cross-sell. And that's how I would tie it in. So it's just, that's how I like to amp it up. So Anne-Marie, let's try to fit 1 or 2 more.
We only have about 3 minutes left, so I'm going to try to get a quick question. How do you decide to remove stale content with no usage?
So when you say it's a regular process. So typically what you do is on a monthly cadence is often the best way to do it. You would basically go in and you would review that, like I showed you, and there's more details behind it, but there's a usage part of the application where you look and say, well, what is the stale content, first of all? And then you look at, well, what's the engagement over time? And look at the community that's been engaging it, that we used to engage it, because at some point, what's the pattern around that engagement now? And then, usually the first step is first to try to promote the content if you believe that it's still relevant. So the owners of that content might say, well, let's send an email. Hey, are you aware of this? This is what this provides you. Next month, you come back and look again. If that same content is exactly the same engagement and it's nobody's really taken off, then you're just simply, there's a little checkbox. You say, okay, I'm removing it from the portal, and it's gone. And then it's either put in sort of an archive area or just removed entirely from the portal. It might still be there in the BI tool environment if you want it, but the point being that it does not clutter the environment, doesn't confuse people when they're looking at it, and it keeps everything relevant and fresh and just useful to the community.
Thank you so much. I'd like to take the opportunity now to get us to our conclusion. I want to thank Marius and David for their contributions. I really want to thank Marius for Metric Insights capabilities and showing us the screenshots from the portal. And considering the number of people in the questions and chat who asked for demos and a deeper dive, I hope you'll come back. Next month, we have a webinar on analytics and business decision making. Following on the BI governance for analytics, we have Octopi presenting a data catalog to support business decision making with analytics. Please register at datamanagementu.com and please visit the Data Management U LinkedIn page. If you stayed for the entire session, you will be entitled to receive a certificate for one professional development unit. And the PDUs are applicable to many different certifications. We hope that you've subscribed to our newsletter so that you get updates on all the webinars and much valuable content, datamanagementu.com. With that, I'd like to wish you a wonderful rest of your day. And finally, again, thanks again to Metric Insights and to Marius and David Markham. Have a good day, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.